Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining HUVR and Cognite for this pre-holiday season fire chat. I'm so glad to have Bob with me, and in a minute we'll get an introduction from Bob as well. My name is Trygve Ronigen. I'm the Senior Vice President of Cognite North America. So we at Cognite, we're all about making data do more for asset-heavy industry. Is that really, whether it's in the oil and gas, power and utility, or manufacturing or beyond, it is really how can we help or enable the industry to do more with the data they have and better use the data to make decisions to grow their demands, but also investing in sustainability and carbon-free energy future. So Bob, great that you could be here with me today. I would like to get you introduced and say a few words about what you're passionate about and what HUVR is doing these days.
Great. Well, Trygve, first, thanks for having me on, and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what side of the world you're on. So I'm happy to be speaking to you today from Austin, Texas, which is our home. We founded HUVR, and I'm the CEO of HUVR, by the way. And we founded HUVR really essentially, very simply, to help asset owners maximize the ROI of how those assets work for them. Very simply that. But the problem that we're trying to solve is to help those asset owners with the modernization and ingestion of different inspection workflows. It turns out that many inspection workflows have radically changed in the past 5 years. New inspection tools and new data sets, and we are there fundamentally to help bring those together so that asset owners can actually enrich how they use that data to maximize production and bring faster ROI. And to your theme that Cognite lives with is we share that fundamental belief that we want to make data do more. And so our partnership with Cognite is a very natural one, and one that we're extremely excited about, to bring the ingestion power of the HUVR system into the data analytics power of the Cognite infrastructure.
Thank you, Bob. So I really think what you're hitting on is our common theme, and the partnership is really growing from the fact that we know there are more and more requirements on the environment. Governments are putting more and more rules around how to report what needs to be reported, and basically it's starting to get very complicated for most companies and most people to keep up with that, and leveraging data to do that in a more efficient way is definitely something that we are looking at, both of us. And we think that in the global industry is still experience challenges from the pandemic. Oil and gas continues to be turbulent. Manufacturing supply chains, which we're seeing, is continue to be disrupted. And now that I expect it will take more time before we're seeing that this is kind of getting back to whatever was normal back a few years. The good news is that I think many of the companies are starting to learn and take on the challenge of things needs to be remote, and we need to work differently. And that allows us to look at more ways to leverage data, more ways to be innovative on how the data could be used. So today, some of the business challenges we see in the market today, can you talk a little bit about what that means from an inspection workflows view, Bob?
Yes. So I think you've structured the environment very well. It's the pandemic has affected every corner of what people are doing, and the common theme that we hear is they have to do much more with less. And so that really means that you have to squeeze value out of anything you can get your hands on. And since we're in the data world, what we're primarily focused on, and we see these collection of problems across upstream, midstream, and downstream, and even different kinds of energy production. And they really get to this. The first is the challenge around how you collect and structure your data. And you have to have a strategy for this. This is not because it affects the way the technicians work. A lot of things are automated, but you need to have a plan on how you collect and that you want to structure your data. The second is, with that in mind, the next problem after you figure that out is you really have to have a plan for how you scale your usage of it in order to do the things that the data is going to locate, which is repairs and or maintenance items. And so a lot of people sort of look over that, and we've had a number of customers actually faced with more problems that they know what to do with. And we'll get into that a little bit. So the second is scaling the repair and maintenance philosophy that you're going to use as a result of having better data. And then the last is really having a near and long-term plan for what you're going to do with the resulting data streams in regards to analyzing it properly and setting yourself up to actually get more savings out of having much more data in-house. So what I mean by that is what is the analytics you want to actually structure, and what do you want to do with it? So these are the three common areas that we see, and I think it'd be worth exploring each of them and kind of if you will, peeling back the layer of each of the onions, because they all have different aspects to them.
So Bob, you're very interesting, and thank you for that insight. I think one of the things that you mentioned a few times is scalability, right? And that seems to be very consistent. What we're hearing across all of the industries is there is no lack of data, and data is moved to the cloud. I mean, we're seeing that is a trend, but really kind of contextualizing and scaling it is something that we're seeing that people aren't very successful at. So help me kind of understand a little bit on when you're talking about scale advantage in data collection, data structuring. That seems to me to be a very interesting area. So how are you addressing that? What do you see the customers reacting on that aspect of it?
So in the data collection area, I'll separate two very different fundamental things that you have to contextualize. Firstly, there obviously is continued modernization of many of the assets through either remote monitoring, sensors, IoT devices, what have you. And those different data flows need to be not only structured, but understood in terms of what matters. Because it's one thing to have all the data coming in, it's another thing to not have a purview of what actually matters within the data streams that you're ingesting. So the first is you need to have a strategy to make sure you are culling out from these real-time streams the things that are material. And some of those are time-based, meaning I've collected real-time inspection data from these valves on these 1,000 tanks, then I'm going to do something with that versus for example, pressure readings on other valves from other places. And so you have to internalize and have a structure around the inbound real-time data. So that's number one. The second, and is the place where we actually spend a lot of our time, is regardless what everybody wants to assume, is there's still a lot of manual data entry and manual visualization and boots on the ground of data that today has to be collected for practical reasons. And in those cases, you need to have a real firm understanding of what tools are A, going to be used, and B, how do you make sure that the process that you're going to put in place is actually going to make that technician's life safer, better, and faster in what they're trying to do for their bosses. And that's not as easy as you might think. the complication that has evolved, and I intimated that there's been many new inspection tools that have been inserted. You can just look at the robotics world, the ultrasonic testing world, the thermal imaging world, the raw imaging world. Those are vastly different technical spaces, and all of us in this industry have seen where these tools are now, whether we like it or not, integrated into the inspection process. So before, when you were in charge of, and I'll just pick on tanks for a minute, if you were in charge of doing a visual inspection, today you have 2 or 3 vastly different tools at your disposal, in addition to, when you are on site, data that you have previously maybe collected on a clipboard now needs to also be digitally ingested. So the digitization of and the processing of that workflow, so that ultimately the inspector's job is safer, better, faster, and bringing in the data ingestion, is really important to not only plan, but set up training and change agents within each organization to make sure that they are actually infused and then scaled. And I've seen failures, not of the data workflow process per se, but just not thinking through the different retraining of different technicians' processes and methods that people overlook, and they turn around and they see that people aren't using the new processes because they weren't trained on how to use them. So these are fundamental things that people often, look over. And in order for you to be able to acquire new data sets at scale, you need to be in both lanes of the real-time, the real-time data flows, and get those structured properly. And then in the things that come in manually, you need to set those things up, for success. So a lot of area there that we've developed a tremendous amount of expertise in. And you have to have the technology stack that, in order to be agnostic to the tool being used, that the data can flow into and then be structured properly to then, go on to the next level, which we'll talk about in a minute. But scale is really about doing these 2 things properly.
Very good. Thank you both. So basically, you're saying a couple of things there that I think is fascinating. One, you can now start doing inspection more kind of loosely coupled from exactly who operates the equipment themselves. So you could actually have someone from the outside do inspection for you, because you're standardizing how you're doing it. So that's one element that I'm taking out from it. But you also allowing the organization to harvest the knowledge that is sitting in, unfortunately, some of the aging workforce that we have today. So that's 2 areas that I think is critical for organizations to drive forward, right?
That you've brought up a very good point, and that is that in today's world of inspection management, everyone is in a hybrid mode, and that means that they have their own badged employees doing portions of those inspections, and then they're very dependent on the ecosystem of very, very qualified inspection companies to do some of that work for them. What is changing and evolving is that in order for that asset owner to truly own and control that data, so that then they can reap the benefits of it, they need to, as you said, standardize that. So it doesn't matter if a technician in Baytown does the inspection that's maybe a member of Exxon staff, but also a highly qualified inspection group that they hire within the Houston area to do the same inspection. It shouldn't matter. The data should come in the same way, so that Exxon can then manage their data properly.
Very good. So it's fair to say that having a live digital representation or access to it, a uniform data foundation and asset model is really step 1, is what I'm hearing you saying, and able to scale these industrial use cases. How can such a kind of foundation then also leverage the processes that asset reliability, repair, and maintenance? How can you take that model once you've kind of created that foundation? How do you standardize the processes then?
So the customers that we have been engaged with, in some cases as much as 4 years, are all going through evolutions. All right. And so the evolutionary phase varies by not only the asset owner, but also different divisions and sites are at different speeds. Okay. So first and foremost, the ability to have the repository now being looked at so that you can now understand, like, what has the data shown me? So what's wrong with the assets that I just discovered, all right? And so this sounds easy, but it actually takes best practices in order to develop the skills and also the budgetary sequence with which the data not only needs to be brought in, the prioritization of the defects understood, and then aligned to the budget process that the company and the asset owner now needs to set up in order to do something about it. That is actually more problematic than most people give it credit. One is when you harness data, you typically need to be prepared for finding out more things than you really expected. And that would go without saying. If you inspect, you typically have very good inspectors and you're going to find problems. So now the case becomes is how do you structure your repair flow? And that's, we've developed, for example, an entire process that at HUVR we call repair flow, so that you can actually identify the repairs and then flow them through your own internal process of prioritization, and then turning around and giving that work out to either subcontractors or people that you're going to need in order for those fixes to be done. So the first is the establishment of the process, and then it is the evolution of it being integrated into sort of, if you will, a new reality. All right. And you'd be surprised how many budget processes are not set up for that, and therefore people are finding themselves behind in the ability to actually fix the things that they've found. So this sounds sort of straightforward, like of course you'd want to fix everything you find. Well, the reality is you can't always afford it. So the first is the setting up, of this, of this process. And then next, it's once you've done that through a cycle or two, you will begin to understand either heartbeats around different budget processes that now you can become more predictable around, or number two, you can develop your own methodology depending on the type of asset. Okay, and so what I mean by that is the types of assets have variations in terms of maintenance schemes. All right, so I'll just mention three, and I'm sure there's many more, but we have many different styles of assets that are specifically designed to run to fail. Okay, now that's just a process, and so they run until they fail, and then that has to be now replaced. And that is a very different maintenance and monitoring routine than something that would be, for example, condition-based monitoring, where when certain conditions are met based on the data infrastructure that's been found through the inspections, then certain maintenance routines kick in. And so that the second of condition monitoring is very, very different than the first. And then the third is just a frequency based, is I'm going to go out every week and I'm going to identify and find and fix problems on that asset class. And there's asset classes that fit into that. And so there isn't a one size fits all. So the other part of the complexity here is you need to be able to have a flexible way to determine the maintenance philosophy that applies to either your asset class or your business or your budget or all three, to align the processes that you want to put in place moving forward. And that's the hard part, because there isn't a formula. and by the way, I've noticed that different owners of different types of assets, they have their own way. So not to pick on Exxon, but Exxon's going to fix tanks one way. ConocoPhillips is probably going to fix tanks a different way. And they're all under the guise of API regulations, but they deal with them differently. And that's just the life. So you can't sort of walk in and go, here's the formula, because it varies, right? And so that's the other part of this scale problem, is that you've got to, once you've understood the data coming in and set yourself up to understand what problems exist, you have to fold that into methodologies within each company so that they can be successful.
Fascinating. So if I try to summarize where we're at today, or where we're at right now, is that we talked about getting a contextualized or a structure of your data is step one. Step two is really what we just talked about, is really setting up your processes for scale. Because if you have to do this differently every single time, different crew, different methods, you're not going to be able to do it at scale and with the same results. But three, the next step then is really how do you, now you have the process, you have the data, how do you get value? Where is the value coming from? What is the value proposition that you will see that the work that you're setting it up for is actually giving the return that that everyone is looking for, I guess.
Yeah, so this is to me where the fun is. You know, and it's the statement, you know, wherever there's mystery, there's margin, right? And there's margin for everybody in terms of value. And what I mean by that is the interesting answer to the question of, you know, what matters to me lies in analytic layers that go across these vast amounts of data and pull up what's material. And what's interesting is that the value of what the constituent wants is directly proportional to what their job is at the company. So let's just talk about 3 examples, and by these examples, you'll see the completely different views that people want. Okay, so let's start with the vice president. Okay, that vice president has under his or her purview an entire business they're running. You know, they need to very quickly have dashboards that align, you know, production outputs to available budgets and available sales and profit margins, and those kinds of dashboards and therefore analytics are very, very different than, let's just go one layer down into, let's say, central engineering. Central engineering, who are the operations people that are in charge of all of the assets across maybe that vice president's, you know, world, they want to know they want to know every pump, every, you know, every flare stack, every tank. They need to see the data because they're going to do correlation on historical to future possibilities to production. And so their dashboards, their data sets, the way that they analyze the data is vastly different than the first. Okay. And then let's go to the third. And the third is excruciatingly practical. And when you hear my description, it'll be like, oh, of course. Well, the site leads, the site managers who are responsible for that site, they're of course very interested the vice president's happy, and they're glad that the engineering group is, you know, knows everything about everything on their plant. But what they care about is what's broken and how do I have to fix it, right? And that list is hopefully a short list, but it's in prioritized order, because what they need to do is every week, every month, every quarter, whatever the right time frame is they need to fix things to make sure that they're up, running safely, and that they're meeting production targets. So if you take a step back from those 3 worlds of analytics, right? The fascinating world of analytics and the benefits of, you know, hyperscale cloud-based systems like Cognite, HUVR and HUVR system is it truly now puts this information at your fingertips. And to me, the value is in and we always have to start with what is the problem. So it's really understanding the constituents' business problem first, that then leads to, then these dashboards or these analytics layers would then allow you to meet those business problems. And then therefore, here is the data sets from which you're going to be diving into to bring that up. And you can follow that exact order in every one of those 3, you know, vastly different constituents, and you will see a resulting set of analytics tools that are completely and very, very different. However, you need to be able to have that flexibility, because at any of these assets owners, these 3 constituents exist. So you don't have sort of a dashboard or one analytics view that is important to everybody. Is you need a tool and data feeding that tool that will allow all of those constituents to actually succeed at the job that they're being paid to perform, right? And so at the end of the day, the value in the analytics that people need is directly associated with their function, job, and budget. And that is what all of us, you know, especially in our partnership, this is what we strive to do, is to make the data they're ingesting do more for each of these individuals. And so the fun of the job is to actually get in with each one of these constituents and then back them in from the problem they have into the data analytics that they need in order to be successful.
Fascinating. So really, in a way, what you're saying here, Bob, is that instead you have so many variations of people with different insight, maybe into the specificity of the assets or the functions that is doing, but by kind of leveraging a technology that labels the data in such a way that a pump is a pump, a valve is a valve, you can start having people with not necessarily the same domain expertise browse the data and understand data in a very different way than what we typically do. And I also think that based on some of the discussion we've had, there is also equipment that is, well, 20, 30 years old, and there is kind of newer equipment because you replace, and they behave and they are named different things and they have different specs. So having the opportunity to kind of translate that into one way of communicating or investigating your data makes it much more consumable by a broader set of audience or consumers of data. So really, again, summarizing, get access to data, make sense out of the data, and use the data to make better decisions and move forward. Is that how you look at it?
Yeah, I think you summarized it very well. I would add to that my personal observation of just really being shoulder to shoulder with some of these asset owners and being affected in terms of the way that we run our company and what we need to go do. We've seen the following the following transition is I believe what's the new generation of problems. Asset management isn't new. We live in a world where asset management software has been around since probably, if you start counting, early 80s. All right, and the generation from the 80s, the 90s, and well into the 2000s, that transition was about actually inserting the ability for data to be flowing into basically a digitally inspected or workflow process, and then corresponding reports and analytics to be done on that. I'm just going to call it those lanes. And that took 25 years in my observation to put in place, to scale it up, and to make software and asset management sort of a household name. But what's happened in the past 5 to 8 years is two, I believe, just really transformative things. The first is the insertion of new digital tools, and that has just radically changed not only what people can see now, but what data they can get, which previously just wasn't available. So that has completely changed that. And then number two, because of those vastly different sums of data, they now have much bigger data management problems than they had before. So the transition that everyone's having to go from the old, if you will, very, very embedded systems that are there today into the new is that they don't have a choice to not absorb these new data streams and not analyzing them. The challenge is, how do they go into this new world, number one. And then number two, all of the companies can't afford to just immediately rip out all the existing systems. So all of us that are bringing in these new technology innovations to them, we all owe them an ability to connect into those legacy systems so they can continue to have those where they're necessary, but they can bring in the new innovative features of data ingestion that we have and the data analytics that you offer at Cognite. So this is the transition that I see. And it's very exciting to me to see the eyes open of the directors of operations when you bring them the ability to, oh my gosh, I can actually see the skimmer inspection that I did on this tank, and the drone inspection that I did on that flare stack, and the crawler inspection I did on that pipeline. I can all see it now, and the defects are all there, and I can still have the guys using IBM Maximo do the repairs because it all flows together. that's when those eyes light up and they go, I'm here. I'm now in the 21st century. This is great. These are the evolutions that we're helping people go through. And I'm super excited about the possibilities that people are that will all step into in the next 5 years of these new data streams and the new analytics tools that both of us are bringing to bear.
Very good. On the screen here we have a drone, and Cognite, as you know, and we talked about this, has played around quite a bit with Boston Dynamics to use the robotics for. But so I think maybe a lot of people also associate this being expensive toys or tools. Today, my experience is getting to a price level where it is actually something that is useful and affordable to use in the area that we're talking about here for inspection or other health and safety areas to actually perform some work for us. But I think maybe also demystify a little bit of that. Inspection is not all about running a drone. And you talked initially about there is so many, which is really fascinating to me when you talk about it, Bob. There are so many tools out on the market that is really doing very, very robust and complex inspections. And you being in part of this have to kind of know about it all and be aware of all that. Can you talk a little bit about the whole kind of market and what is made available now, not in big boxes or big equipment, but actually in something you kind of carry around in your pocket? It's an amazing development that's happened in that space as well.
Yeah, I think your analogy is a perfect one, and I'll expand it by saying this. All of the robotics innovations and inspection tool innovations that we see are following essentially what you could use as an analogy of the cell phone innovation and cost curve. Okay, so I'll age myself and say that my first cell phone was the Motorola Brick. Okay, and I was the big man on campus. I had one, and that thing, if you remember, it was the size of a brick and had an antenna this big. And now we're walking around with these guys, right? And that happened in 10 to 12 years. But the acceleration of the technology and cost curve, which we've all witnessed in the past 5, is just the natural, if you will, evolution of that technology curve. And we're seeing that in almost every single robotic lane that we observe. Okay, so thermal cameras used to be these big giant things you had on your shoulder, and they were $100,000 a piece. Now you can get an incredible handheld or mobile one that you put up in a drone from FLIR for under a couple $100, right? And that's the same cost curve that you see in cell phones. Okay, so what we're very excited about is as these cost curves bring everything down, not only in cost, but also in reliability and safety. As all these come in, they are going to just continue to change the universe of things that are going to operate in a very safe environment, automate many things that humans really don't like to do because it's unsafe, and give us eyes and ears and sensors in places that we could not get to on a regular basis. So we're seeing that innovation curve happening in every angle. And then on top of that, every one of these new hardware devices is driving a new software innovation in regards to the data they're collecting, the sensor information that they're feeding, that are providing just new report styles, new defect identification, etc. All those are going to be made available to us. So the entire area of inspection tool innovation is just going through just a complete metamorphosis, and it is unstoppable. It's all very well funded. They're all very healthy startups that are all competing against one another to bring the best product and cost curve out. And so all of us are going to be able to experience that benefit. And you know, for us at HUVR, we aspire to be Switzerland. That is one of our core tenets, is we are agnostic to the tool you use. We're partnering. You can see our partner network where we're partnering with all of these different companies so that their data will naturally ingest and be able to be structured properly. But in the area of inspection tools, we see a tremendous amount of innovation that we're very excited about.
Thank you so much, Bob. I think you and I can kind of continue this conversation till today at late evenings. So I just want to thank you for joining me today. And I think that just looking at some of the recent and well-published industrial incidents, like what we had here in Texas last winter, the criticality of having a solid plan for your asset reliability is huge. The equipment is aging, and we also want to. We all care about our environment, and we want to kind of make sure that we operate in as carbon neutral environment as we possibly can. So all that is kind of related to having good inspection, making sure that we fix things before they break, and that we're making sure that we're putting new methods or mechanics into how we make decisions. So maybe replacing something if the emissions from it is higher than it should be, maybe it's an economical decision to actually replace things. So all of this is really fascinating to me, and I think it will just kind of continue to be an important aspect for all industries to have a good and solid plan. So thank you so much for that. I think that maybe there are some questions from the audience here. We're getting a few questions, Bob, around potentially some lesson learned from deployment. From what we talked about, this isn't, in my opinion, and I'll leave it to you to answer, but this isn't kind of a couple of years of project before you can start getting benefits. Talk a little bit about what you think is kind of an opportunity to actually take value very, very quickly on some of these initiatives.
So one of the questions that we get quite a bit, and it's embedded in the discovery that everybody's trying to do, and laying at the base of this is, you know, is this going to take me a year to put in? Is this a long process to figure out how to roll something out? And the truth is that we spend the most amount of time actually trying to consult and discover what the asset owner actually wants to find out. Because it turns out that the process to digitize the inspection workflow, to put training in place and then actually get it launched, can be done inside of a few weeks. All right. And so I think one of the myths is that in order to take this step, that you have to invest, you know, millions and spend, you know, years getting there, and that's absolutely a myth. You can put this in place in weeks and have an immediate impact. And what I mean by that is immediate ROI in hours saved, fundamental better data, better reports, and better management of those repairs. You can start seeing that in weeks. And that's, I think, one of the biggest myths we see, and what we try to make sure we help and consult people with, because it's not as hard as you might think. It does take a commitment from the organization to put it in place, but this is a weeks thing, not years thing before you see an immediate return and benefit.
Thank you. Well, I think, Bob, that is very consistent what we see on the Cognite side as well. And I think it's getting to be a more and more demand that you have to show return on investment quicker and quicker. But I think based on some of the conversation we had before today, Bob, around scalability. So we talked about making sure that we have a good foundation, that we have scalable processes, and then the reporting on top of it is feeding from those two first steps. meaning to scale from one facility to the next facility is again a matter of a week or so to adjust, not again another project for many years to do. So I think that is the learning that we have, and I think that's common or similar to what your experience, Bob.
Yes, and you know, it always varies by organization, but you have to think within different groups, different sites, and then externally, different subcontractors and service companies, and how you're going to manage that change agency throughout that process. Some of it requires retraining, because some of the people who've been doing that job for 2 decades, they don't have the computer skills that the new folks coming in do, so you have to retrain people. Secondarily, there's people who are sort of saying, this is the way we used to do it in Nairobi, and I'm not going to do it the way they do it in Louisiana. Well, somebody in that organization needs to decide how it's going to be done at the organization, and then that needs to be put in place. And then lastly, there are a lot of practices that have been used by many inspection companies, subcontractors, that are all very good and very fine. But at the end of the day, I think one of the evolutions that everybody has to go through is, you know, the asset owners own the assets. The asset owners want to own the data, and therefore they need to kind of stipulate the way that they want it done. And what we see is the friction point is some of the, if you will, legacy subcontractors or inspection companies. They don't want to do it the asset owner's way. They want to do it their way. And so that is another inhibitor. So I think all of these forces play into the friction that people have to put it in. And it's not a technology issue. It's, at the end of the day, it's almost sometimes human nature. And it's just getting everybody to evolve into kind of the newer way to do things. And so that takes time, and the benefits are clear once they've seen them. And what we see is people eye open up and they go, oh, this is much easier than I thought. Please never take this away. Right?
Very good. Bob, I don't see much more questions in the chat here, so I would like to just finish up and have wish you all a happy holiday when it's time to do that. I think a lot of people is actually looking forward to spending some time with the family now over the holidays. So happy holiday, Bob. I'm looking forward to exploring this further into the next year. But until then, have a happy holiday, and thank you so much for attending today.
Thanks for having me, and happy holidays to everybody. Thanks.